Hi everyone, this is Miss Peplinski reporting for the lesson on Friday, September 30th. Today we are doing Sectionalism Part 2. Yesterday on September 29th, we covered Part 1 of Sectionalism. Today we are covering Part 2. So as always, the first thing you'll want to do is go into Canvas and complete the 930 more Sectionalism warm-up. So let's go ahead and find that together. We are now in Unit 3. This is the second day of Unit 3. So go down to Unit 3, go down to September 30th, open up the 930 warm-up. That is today's date. Everything is always sorted by today's date. And open up these questions and answer them to the best of your ability individually. Which two crops drastically impacted the institution of slavery in America? That's going to be tobacco and cotton. Tobacco was earlier. At this point, we're studying as cotton. What did the Missouri Compromise say about where slavery was legal? It was legal everywhere south of the southern border of Missouri. How did slavery and westward expansion increase sectional tensions between the North and South from 1820 to 1850? They increased debates between state and federal rights. They increased debates between states' rights and how much the federal government could control. Always try those yourself first. So today we're going to discuss that warm-up, which we just did. We'll have some background information and model analysis of a primary source. Then we'll get into stations and complete an exit ticket. The goal is to analyze how racism, oppression, and discrimination impacts equality and power in the United States. Again, today is going to be one of my EdTPA, that's my certification board, recorded lesson days. So everyone, I hope that you will give me your best, bring your smiles, bring your best energy, positive vibes, and we're gonna have a great day. So this is some review from yesterday. I want you to type in the Pear Deck, what was the Missouri Compromise? And reference your notes from yesterday, your worksheet from yesterday. What was the Missouri Compromise? This was the line that was drawn that we just talked about in the warm-up that said any states southern of the South Missouri border may allow slavery, while states northern to that border may not allow slavery. Now I want you to type in your Pear Deck again. What was the Compromise of 1850? So this was the complicated one. Had 5 parts. California admitted as a free state, no slavery allowed. The slave trade was outlawed in Washington, D.C. The Fugitive Slave Act began, which required Northerners and abolitionists to return enslaved people who escaped to the North. Anyone remember any other parts? Let's see. Take just a second to think about what other parts were there in the Compromise of 1850. Look back at your notes. If you're with anyone who's in the class, talk to someone about it. What was the Compromise of 1850? Another part is that New Mexico is organized on popular sovereignty. That means the people who live there will just vote on whether they would like slavery to be legal. And same with Utah, organized on popular sovereignty. I want you to talk to your table. I just mentioned it. What is the Fugitive Slave Act? Fugitive Slave Act. Talk to anybody who might be with you. So the Fugitive Slave Act required the federal government and Northerners, including abolitionists, that means people who disapprove of slavery and want to make it illegal, requires them to return any enslaved people or report them who escape to states that do not allow slavery. We also have the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. So this opened slavery to the principle of popular sovereignty. So these both would have been, quote, free states, states that do not allow slavery. However, it allowed them both to vote within that territory on whether or not they would like to allow slavery, rather than following this Missouri Compromise line. The Northerners were outraged by the Kansas-Nebraska Act because it allowed Congress to allow slavery to spread into an area that the United States had previously outlawed slavery in. Therefore, Northerners formed the Republican Party in 1854, and it's going to be today's Republican Party, and they became committed to the Free Soil movement. The Free Soil Party is an anti-extension of slavery, don't want to extend it to any extra territories, pro-employing people on wages, pro-labor. Popular sovereignty failed to settle the slavery question in the West. Remember, popular sovereignty is voting within that territory on whether the territory would like to allow slavery. When a vote was held in Kansas in 1855 to decide on slavery, thousands of Missouri residents illegally voted. This illegal vote gave Kansas slavery when its residents have voted against it. In 1856, a war began between Kansas and Missouri as a result of this event, and it was called Bleeding Kansas. So here we have an image. It says, forcing slavery down the throat of a free soiler. Remember, free soilers are the Northerners who do not want slavery to spread. Here, this is a person who's drawn with dark skin. It says, murderer, help, neighbors help, oh my poor wife and children. So we have over here, Democratic platform, Kansas, Cuba. So we have the Southerners, the Democrats, forcing this man who is tied down, mouth open, who represents a free soiler. This man represents slavery, forcing slavery onto free soilers, who is this man who is laying down here. So I want you to write on the pear deck about what you see. I just revealed a little bit to you here. So do you think that this artist supports or does not support slavery? Why do you think so? I would say, you can argue either way. I would say does not support slavery because it's showing that the Democrats, the Southerners, are cruelly forcing the Northerners to engage with slavery, even though they do not want to. They're being tied down against their will. And the enslaved person, who's represented by this man here, is being portrayed as being eaten. He's shouting murderer. So that makes me think that this artist is against slavery. What does this tell us about sectionalism? So remember, I said these guys who are holding the mouth open are representing the Democrats, the Southerners, and this man who is tied down is representing a Northerner. So he's giant. Because he's so much bigger than the Southerners, it's showing that the Northerners do have a lot of political power. However, together, the Southern states have bound together and are able to manipulate the North because they are so populous now. Remember, we were talking about the balance in Congress. So the Southerners, the Democrats, have more balance in Congress, more representation in Congress. In 1857, an enslaved person named Dred Scott sued for his freedom after traveling with his master from Missouri to Wisconsin. The Dred Scott case presented the Supreme Court with two major questions. Does Congress have the power to decide on slavery in the territories? And is the Missouri Compromise constitutional? In the Dred Scott versus Sanford case in 1857, the Supreme Court ruled Dred Scott had no right to sue because Black people were not citizens. Congress did not have the power to stop slavery in Western territories, so the Missouri Compromise was ruled unconstitutional. Northern abolitionists were furious. Remember, abolitionists are people who want to end slavery. Abraham Lincoln in 1858 said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free." John Brown is an abolitionist. He's involved in the Underground Railroad. He moved to Kansas to support the anti-slavery cause. He responded to violence by pro-slavery men by organizing the murder of 5 pro-slavery settlers at Pottawatomie Creek, the Pottawatomie Creek Massacre. Brown planned a raid on federal arsenal. He wanted to distribute weapons to enslaved people, but the action failed. Brown and his men were mostly captured and killed within 36 hours. Brown was ultimately hanged. Abraham Lincoln called Brown a misguided fanatic. This is your exit ticket. We are not done for the day, so we will come back to this close to the end. I will just make a note here so that we shouldn't have revealed that to you yet. We're going to open the 930 more sectionalism stations on Canvas. All right, we are going to complete station 1 together. So you're going to go into the American History course, into modules, down to American Unit 3. And you're going to click on 930 more sectionalism stations. So as I make a copy of the worksheet here, go ahead and open that. Let's do the first one together here. So there's a question at the top to keep in mind. What did the ruling of Dred Scott case mean for African American people in 1857? So you can either mute me, skip ahead, read this to yourself. I'll read it out loud for you here. The Dred Scott case, New York Times, December 25th, 1856. The Dred Scott case. The case of Dred Scott, which has been argued at length before the Supreme Court at Washington, involves principles of great political as well as legal importance. As the facts may not be in the minds of all our readers, we copy the following clear statement of the case from a Washington letter. Dear Emerson of the U.S. Army, took with him from Missouri a slave called Dred Scott as a body servant to a military post at Rock Island in the state of Illinois. After remaining there for 2 years, he removed to Fort Snelling, which post is north of the line of 36 degrees and 30. At this last post, a slave woman, brought there by Major Taliaferro and owned by him, was married to Dred Scott, and they had 2 children, one of whom was born at this post, and another at the parties after the parties had returned to Missouri. Neither of these slaves, Dred Scott or his wife, were ever set free by their owners. But under the Constitution of Illinois, slavery is prohibited, and Dred Scott could have asserted his right to freedom in that state. The second posting in Fort Snelling was a territory in which slavery was prohibited by the Missouri Act of 1820. Scott and his wife were sold by their owners to Sanford, against whom the suit was brought for their freedom. Scott claimed that having been voluntarily carried by his owner into a free state, and having been their servant, he was upon his voluntary return with his master to Missouri a free man there, in virtue of his temporary residence in a free territory. The same claim was made on behalf of his wife. The Missouri court decided against Dred Scott to the claim, on the ground that temporary residence in a free state did not make them free in the state of Missouri, unless their owners had signified by some act an intention to free them from slavery by taking them into a free territory, which did not appear to be the fact in this case. Dred Scott appeals to the United States Supreme Court. Scott's claim to freedom rests upon two grounds. First, that he was taken voluntarily by his master into a state whose constitution prohibited slavery, Rock Island, Illinois, and resided there for 2 years. Second, that he was afterwards taken into a territory from which, by act of Congress, slavery had been expressly prohibited, Fort Snelling. It would be seen that if the Supreme Court sustains the right of Congress to prohibit slavery in a territory, and also holds that the master lost his right of property by taking the slave into a territory where slavery could not legally exist, both Scott and his wife must be decided to be free. The question which this involves is substantially whether any state has the right to abolish slavery, or whether slave property is so recognized and protected by the Constitution of the United States that it cannot be outlawed in states' laws. Right, here are our questions. In which state was Dred Scott originally serving Dr. Emerson as a slave? Let's scroll back up here. Look in the text. Here it says from Missouri. Took him with him from Missouri. So that's going to be Missouri. Which two locations was Dred Scott taken to where slavery was banned? So we have Rock Island, Illinois here. Write that for 1A. Rock Island, Illinois. And Fort Snelling. That's the second one. How does the Missouri Compromise, also known as the Compromise of 1820, impact this case? So here we have this. After remaining there for 2 years, he removed to Fort Snelling, which post is north of the 3630 line. That's the Missouri Compromise line. They just referred to it by something different. So he went north of that line where slavery was not allowed. According to the New York Times, remember this was written by the New York Times, you can find out from the top. What is the essential question that this case is trying to answer? This here. Whether slave property is so recognized and protected by the Constitution of the United States that it cannot be outlawed by state laws. That's it. That's it for that one. So your class will either have 5 or 6 tables. So I'll start you off with one of these, give you paper copies, and make this available to you online. That'll be the 5th. In my class with 6 tables, that's third block, there will be a table that works on this one. Missing assignments, goal for the unit, accomplish this goal by. For my class that has 5 groups, you will complete this one, station 7, whenever you finish one of the other tables early. Whenever you finish that early. And before you go, we will complete this exit ticket. So this is John Brown, we talked about here, the abolitionist who killed people who were pro-slavery. But what do you see in this image? He's portrayed as strong. This is probably the Bible. He has a gun. He's stepping on people. We have the Confederate flag, the American flag. These groups are facing each other, looking like they're going to fight. What does it make you think of? Maybe you can relate this to the Boston Massacre picture that we saw in Unit 1. People are shown fighting one another from two opposite sides. Those are your exit ticket questions. How does this image portray Brown? Shows him as very strong, very powerful, and willing to do anything for his cause. Of course, there are more than one possible answer. But when you're done, make sure you've submitted your warm-up, exit ticket, and the station's document to campus. Thank you all. Have a good one.